Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another video today. If you want to see what other scenes I've read through and analyzed from Mr. Erickson's Malazan books, go ahead and look through my channel and playlists. But today we'll be talking about a third scene I've picked to analyze from Forge of Darkness, Book 1 in Mr. Erickson's prequel Kharkanas trilogy, a prequel trilogy to the 10-volume main Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I personally love these prequels, and I'm hoping to get more people talking about them online. That said, I'll give a full spoiler warning here for Forge of Darkness, this book right here, as well as for up through at least book 8 of Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is Toll the Hounds, it's book 8 there. So, setting the scene. Lord Draconus, a noble and love interest of Mother Dark, the ruler of Corald Galain, Draconus is on a quest to retrieve a magical object of power for her, and he's journeyed into the lands of the Azathanai, who are basically the demigods, as well as the lands of the scattered and isolated Jagot peoples. With him, by this point, Draconus only has his son, Erethan. Their father-son relationship has been developing throughout the novel, and to hear more on that, I have a specific video all about the theme of parenting in this book. But anyway, at the end of their journey, Draconus has been made aware that the wife of a Jagot was killed to create this powerful present Draconus wanted to give Mother Dark. And Draconus never wanted anyone to get hurt, so he and Erethan are walking up to the Tower of Hate, where apparently reside at least one Jagot, and around this Tower of Hate are some surrounding homes and towers, and Draconus is going to try to make amends for this loved one of someone having been killed on his Draconus' behalf. And the scene is told from Erethan's point of view. And in this scene, let's keep three things in mind. Number one, what does it mean to be writing a suicide note that never ends? Number two, what does it mean to wage a war against the concept of death and mortality? And three, how does Erickson use dramatic irony to make this scene better? Alright, so here we go. Erethan followed Draconus out onto the expanse that in any other city would have been called the Square. A high tower rose amidst a cluster of lesser kin directly opposite, where the others were squat and angular and made of gray granite. The tower before them was faced in what looked like white marble, round-walled, smooth, and graceful. The buildings gathered at its foot seemed as crass as hovels. Draconus reined in before one such lesser tower and dismounted. He turned to Erethan. "Hobble your horses. We have arrived." Erethan tilted his head and let his eyes travel the height of the white edifice. "I do not understand," he said, "why such a beautiful thing should be called the Tower of Hate." Pausing for a moment beside Calaris, Draconus frowned at his son. Then he gestured to the low doorway of the squat tower. "In here," he said. The aperture was narrow and low enough to force him to duck when he stepped within. After hobbling Bezra and Halar, Erethan followed. The chamber was dark and vaguely rank, its low ceiling bearing smoke-blackened rafters and beams stained with what looked like bird guano. A high-backed chair was positioned in a corner close to three vertical slits in the wall that passed for windows. The light spilling through ran like bars across a small high desk, on which sat a stack of vellum as tall as the wine goblet that stood beside it. Roughly made feather quills were scattered about on what remained of the desk's flat top, with more littering the stone floor underneath the wooden legs. In the corner to the left of the chair, a trapdoor in the floor had been lifted back, and from somewhere below, pale light drifted upward like dust. Draconus drew off his leather gloves and tucked them behind his sword belt. He looked around and then said, "Wait here. I will go and find us some chairs." "Do we seek an audience, father? Are we in the gatekeeper's tower?" "No," he replied, and made his way outside. There was a scuffing sound from the trap, and a moment later a figure climbed into view. Erethan had never before seen a Jagot, as he knew this creature to be. Tall, gaunt, with skin the hue of olives, bearing creases and seams similar to those on lizard hide. The tusks curled as they swept up from the lower jaw to either side of a wide, slit mouth. Heavy brow ridges hid the eyes. The Jagot was wearing a frayed robe of wool, unevenly dyed a watery purple. In one hand he held an ink bottle. His fingers were stained black. Ignoring Erethan, the Jagot walked to the desk and set the ink bottle down, and then, as if exhausted by the chore, he sat in the cushioned chair and leaned back to rest his head. A flicker of dull gold marked his eyes as he studied the desktop. When he spoke, his voice was deep but rough. Some write in wine, but others write in blood. As for me, why, I prefer ink. Less painful that way. I invite no excesses, but moderation. But some would view even moderation to be a vice. What think you? Erethan cleared his throat. We seek an audience with the Lord of Hate. Okay, so first break here, we've set the scene, and we as readers, we know about a character named Gothos, who this just might be, and Gothos' folly, his endless suicide note. We know about all of that from the epigraphs and brief moments. We get to meet him in Erikson's Book of the Fallen. But here, Erikson is peeling back the curtain a bit and actually showing us Gothos in the process of working on that suicide note. We'll see more of this in a bit, but I should say here at the beginning that this is basically the final moments. This whole scene is the final moments of the Erethan storyline in this book, except for one brief thing right at the very end in the epilogue. So this is not, while this is not the most action-packed or spectacular conclusion to any storyline, Erikson is still managing to make it extremely compelling, and I'm excited to get into more of the reasons for why and how that is. Moving on. The Jagot snorted. That fool, he bleeds ink like a drunk pissing in the alley. His very meat is sodden with the bile of his dubious wit. He chews arguments like broken glass, and he bathes all too infrequently. What business would you have with him? None of any worth, I imagine. They come seeking a sage, and what do they find? Look at that heap of writing there on the desk. He writes a suicide note, and it is interminable. His audience blinks, too filled with self-importance to choke out a laugh. Death, he tells them, is the gift of silence. One day, we will all roll into that crypt, where the painted walls hide in darkness and even the dust will not stir. Tell me, do you long for peace? My father seeks out some chairs, Erethan said. He will be back shortly. You bear the trappings of a Tyst. No one doubts the power of the suzerain of night, yet many doubt his will. But it is not his will that so endangers everyone. It is his temper. Tell them that, Tyst child, before it is too late. Erethan shook his head. I will not return to my people, he said. I mean to stay here. Here? In the Tower of Hate, he answered. And where might that tower be? The tall one of white marble, where dwells the Lord of Hate. Have you visited that tower yet, Tyst child? No? A secret awaits you then. A secret most delicious. But I see your impatience. If one must build an edifice of hate, what manner of stone should be selected in its construction? Something pure? Very good. And to build a tower for all to see. It should shine bright, yes? Erethan nodded. Thus, white marble, or, in the case of the tower you mentioned, opal. Of course, no Jagot could build such a thing. We've not the talent to squeeze opal from rubble and dust. No, for such a miracle, one needs an Azathanine mason, one with an appropriate sense of humor. Why, you ask? Well, because humor is necessary once the secret is made known. So tell me, how many floors should this tower have? Name for me the levels of hate. Okay, another break here. Erikson starts commenting here on the literalizing of some of these bigger, broader ideas. So the rhetorical question is sort of, what does hate itself look like? That sort of thing. Erikson, as a fantasy author, can describe a physical manifestation of hate through something magical or mystical or wondrous. And Gothos is, I think, sort of poking at Erikson, basically saying, oh, if you're going to craft these wonderful visuals with imagery and the magic in your world building, how far can you stretch that? Can you make things like chaos, hate, darkness, light, death? Can you make these things much more literal manifestations? And if you do, what's the next step, Mr. Erikson? And that's at least how I read it, the fact that Gothos is sort of needling this point. If you're going to describe a tower called the Tower of Hate, what does that look like? Mr. Erikson, how do you know? How can you describe such kind of an intangible thing? Anyway, moving on. I cannot, sir, said Erethan. Is hatred not a thing that blinds? What make you of a suicide note that never ends? A joke, he replied. Ah, and do you appreciate it? Erethan shrugged, wondering where his father had gone to. I appreciate the irony, I suppose. Just that? Well, you're young still. Hate will blind, yes. There are no levels to it at all. You spoke of purity, and now we have discussed the matter of singularity. What of windows? What manner of door should be cut into this pure, singular thing? Windows are not needed, because all that lies outside hate matters not to the one within. And the door? Erethan studied the Jagged for a moment, and then he sighed. The tower is solid stone, isn't it? But that's not right. There must be a way in, but no way out. Until you bring it down in conflagration. But if it is solid, then none can live within it. None do. Not what any sane person would call living, anyway. Another break here. And let's think about how impossible and or tortuous it would be to live in a physical manifestation of hate itself. There are also subtler comments in this brief passage here that call to mind the Foral Ken, or the Forkroll Assail, and to a lesser extent Ursander's Legion, and what Solana and them go on to do in this book and even in the next book. These are ideas like purity and singularity, and they call to mind that unwavering sense of right and wrong and justice that leads the most hateful peoples to carry out horrible crimes in the name of whatever they think purity is. All very interesting stuff. Moving on. Draconus appeared in the doorway. You've gone and burned all the furnishings in every home nearby, he said, striding into the chamber. The winters are cold, suzerain. We were just discussing Gothos' folly, your son and I. See the trunk beside the doorway, and there you will find wine of passing quality, and Thalakai ale, if you would invite insensibility. I would speak with Hood, said Draconus, walking over to the trunk. The lid creaked as he lifted it. He peered within for a moment, and then withdrew a clay jug. Excellent choice, suzerain, said the Jagged. It should be, as it was my gift to you the last time we met. Save for your return. The Teist have some worth in the world after all, given their talents in the making of wine. Draconus withdrew a pair of alabaster goblets and studied them. Kaladin Brood has a subtle hand, does he not? He does, when he so chooses. It is curious. Upon the heels of my proclamation, and in the midst of the dissolution that followed, I am showered with gifts. How can one fathom the minds of the Azathani? Does Hood remain below? Draconus asked as he poured wine into the two goblets. I cannot get rid of him, it's true. His father offered Erethan one of the goblets. Startled, he accepted. Draconus then went to the desk, picked up the goblet there, and sniffed at the wine. He flung the contents against the wall and refilled the goblet from the clay jug, then handed it across to the Jagged. Your son wishes to remain in the keeping of the Lord of Hate. Draconus nodded. He would make of himself a gift to you. As what, a keepsake, an ornament? What function could he possibly serve? He is trained in letters well enough, Draconus mused, sipping at the wine. How many volumes have you compiled thus far, Gothos? An even dozen stacks, to match the one on the desk. Written in an execrable hand, every word, every line. Draconus frowned across at their host. Not an old Jagged, I trust. Of course not, that would be ridiculous. A language for the compilers of lists, a language for tax collectors with close-set eyes and sloping foreheads, a language for the unimaginative and the petty-minded, a language for the unintelligent and the obstinate. And how often do those two traits go hand in hand? Old Jagged, why, I would have killed myself after the first 3 words. He paused and then grunted. If only I had, I confess, suzerain, I have indeed written in Old Jagged, easily taught that written script. And you charge me to subject your only son to such an ordeal to an end, that he might transcribe your writings into a more suitable language. Teist? Draconus nodded. He will go blind, his hand will wither and fall off to lie on the floor like a dead bird. He will need more than chains to keep him here. Even the Lord of Hate has limits, suzerain, until such time as he awakens unto himself. This seems as safe a place as any, Gothos, and I trust you to be an even-handed master. I am to be the vault to your treasure? Dear me, Draconus, but I see hard weather ahead. The thought was his, not mine, Draconus said, and turned to Erethan. If you still mean to stay. I will, father. Why? Barked Gothos. Speak, Teist child. Because, sir, an unending suicide note cannot but be a proclamation on the worth of living. Is it now? I will argue against you, Teist child. Night upon night, page upon page, I will attack your belief, your faith, your certainty. I will assail you without pause for breath, and seek to crush you under the heel of my hard-won wisdom. What have you that dares to claim the strength to withstand me? Lord, said Erethan, I have youth. Gothos slowly leaned forward, his eyes glittering. You will lose it. Eventually, yes. The Lord of Hate slowly leaned back. Draconus, Your son does you proud. He does, his father whispered. Okay, so I agree with Erethan here, actually. Not only does Gothos admit earlier in the scene that in some cases humor is necessary, but then Erethan also points out the humorous irony of an unending suicide note, and then Gothos goes on to have a humorous conversation with Draconus, first about wine and then about transcription. If there's always more to say, more comedy, more whatever, if Gothos' mind is always working and learning and amending and expanding by writing this suicide note, then what truer testament to the value of life and the worth of living could there be? So yeah, I really do agree with Erethan here. Gothos then held up a large, ornate key. You will need this, suzerain. Nodding, Draconus set down his empty goblet and took up the key. Then he went below. The Lord of Hate continued eyeing Erethan. Never doubt your father's courage. I never have, sir. How has he named you? Erethan. Gothos grunted. And do you? What? Walk on water, for such is the Azathanai meaning of your name. No, sir. Even upon ice I broke through and came near to drowning. Do you now fear it? Fear what, sir? Water, ice. Erethan shook his head. Your father means to free Hood. What do you imagine he desires from such a perilous act? I would think, sir, some form of redemption. Then it was indeed by Erastus's hand, the slaying of Karish and now others. Alas, your father does not understand the Jagut. He imagines that Hood will set out to hunt down the wayward Azathanai. He would see the legendary rage of my people unleashed upon this upstart, with blood on his hands, but that shall not come to pass. Then what will Hood do? He grieves for the silence she now gives him, Erethan. I fear in truth that he will announce a war upon that silence. All to hear her speak again, one more time, one last time. He will, if he is able, shatter the peace of death itself. How is that even possible? Gothos shook his head. Since I am the one who flees death tirelessly, I am not the one to ask. The Lord of Hate waved one ink-stained hand. We wage war with our follies, Hood and me, and so are repelled in opposite directions. I chase the dawn, and he would chase the dusk. I do not begrudge his resolve, and can only hope that my fellow Jagat choose to ignore his summons. Why wouldn't they? It is impossible. Madness. Attractive qualities indeed. Impossible and mad, yes, but most worrying of all, it is audacious. And I think we get here, another break here, sorry. We get here finally a great example of why Erikson has chosen to set up the scene like this. Gothos admits he is tirelessly fleeing death with his suicide note. All the while, his brother is now going to challenge death head on. And first we're introduced to Gothos, and we're about to be introduced to Hood. It's this literal fight or flight dynamic applied to these two brothers, these two characters. And if writing an unending suicide note is a sort of poetic way to demonstrate someone fleeing death, we, the readers, are left in suspense what Hood is going to do and what Erikson is going to use to literally demonstrate someone fighting death. Moving on. Then in truth you fear they will answer him. Gothos shrugged. Even a few could cause trouble. Now, more wine, please. I believe the bottle bred another in the trunk somewhere. Do go and look, will you? Instead, Erethan glanced at the trap. Sighing, Gothos said, It bodes ill that you already tire of my company. Go on, then, and appease your curiosity. Erethan approached the trap and looked down. The steps were made of wood, warped and worn with age. They were steep, the light coming from below was pale. He made his way down. After the 12th step, he reached the earthen floor. It was uneven, with roots snaking across it like a tangled web. He could see no walls. The light was pervasive, but without any obvious source. He saw his father standing at the edge of a pool 15 paces ahead. In the center of the pool was an island, only a few paces across, where sat a Jagut. He seemed to have torn away his clothes and raked claws through his own flesh. Heavy manacles bound his wrists, the chains plunging into the island's rocky surface. Erethan made his way to stand beside his father. Okay, Now let us take a moment to compare us, the reader, with Erethan, the character. This is Erethan's first time seeing these real titans of power and influence in the whole Malazan world universe thing. Both Draconus and Hood coming face to face. But then we, the readers, we know a lot more than Erethan about what's to eventually come of these two millennia in the future. And even in one of my other scene analysis videos, I covered the moment in Book 8 of Book of the Fallen, Toll the Hounds, in which Hood and Draconus come face to face again. So Erikson knows he's given all of us one of our last one of their last real significant scenes together. And through that lens, I think Erikson knows that that scene is weighing on all of our minds right now. What are these two characters going to say that might foreshadow their eventual fates that we all know about? What are they going to give away? What don't they know that we know? This brilliant, this all dread adds this brilliant dramatic irony and a certain tension to an otherwise pretty cordial encounter that we're about to get into. Anyway, here it is. Draconus was speaking. I mean to purge the gift and give it to the knight. I know that this offers no absolution. He paused and then said, Kurul is not alone in seeking justice for the murder, Hood. I can think of no Azathanai who is not outraged by Erastus's crime. Hood was silent, eyes downcast. I would release you, Draconus said. A low laugh came from the imprisoned Jagat. Ah, Draconus, you sought from Erastus a worthy symbol of your love for Mother Dark. To achieve that, he stole the love of another, and made from blackwood leaves the gift you sought. By this we are all made to bow before your need. Hood lifted his head, his eyes catching the strange silver reflection from the pool. And now you stand before me, struggling to constrain your rage, a rage you feel on my behalf. But you see, I do not blame Erastus or his foolish companion Setchel-Lath, nor do I look upon you with vehemence. Be a sword if you will, but do not expect me to wield it. My fury remains, Hood, and I will curse Erastus for his deed, and for my own role in it. I will forge a sword and make of it a prison. Then you are a fool, Draconus. I ask no redemption from you. I seek no compensation, and am as unmoved by your sympathy as I am by your rage. Your gestures are your own. Quenched in vitor. Cease this sordid description. What I will do, once I am freed, will unwind all of existence. Your fevered remonstrance is without relevance. Your gestures are reduced to petty exercises bolstering little more than your sense of self-importance. And in this I see you join the chorus of a million voices, but the song is sour and the refrain rings false. Give me the key, then, and be gone. Hood, you cannot defeat death itself. You would know nothing of that, Draconus. I shall call for companions. My enemy shall be the injustice of mortality. I am certain that I will gather a few to my cause, the grieving, the lost. We shall be a solemn handful, but none will doubt our resolve. Okay, so two big things to talk about before I finish up the scene. First, if we didn't connect that the last time we've seen these two talking was within Dragnapur, then Erikson is making sure here to bring up Draconus' intentions to create such a sword. And secondly, just Hood's whole intentions of waging war against death in a book where so many people want to wage war against each other for the deaths of their loved ones. I don't know about you, but it is exactly, I think, what Gothos said. It's inspiring in its audacity. In a book so full of so many people kind of self-righteously deluding themselves into waging war and violence against each other and tearing their civilization apart, maybe the only war that actually does make sense is, in fact, a war on death. And all the more heartbreaking notion when you think about how such a thing is only really possible in this book, or a book like this, in this genre because of the fantasy setting. So, by contrast, I think we can say Erikson is arguing that any just cause for war in the real world could never be as just as Hood's cause here. But also, tragically, here's that dramatic irony again, because we, the readers, know Hood sort of conquers death, but death is still a thing, and if anything, Hood eventually becomes sort of just a figurehead of death and a slave to this mighty literalized concept, a slave to being that figurehead. And he's not going to be successful in freeing himself from that role until millennia from this point. Thankfully, we have the benefit of knowing that he eventually does free himself from that role, from that position, but we also know that it takes a heck of a long time for Hood to get there. Anyway, finishing up the scene. And where, then, will you find the shores of that unknown sea, Hood? What bridge can you hope to cross without releasing your soul to the very oblivion you seek to destroy? Heed well the lessons I will bring, Draconus, in my argument with death. I fear that we will not meet again, Erethan's father said. There are greater fears, Draconus. Make your regret modest, and we'll never have cause to curse one another, and in that may we find peace between us. You break my heart, Hood. Voice no such confessions, lest Gothos hear you, and be incited to mockery. I never refused his arguments, though he might well choose to believe otherwise. Nothing of what he dismantled with his words was worth keeping. We are never eased for long by the accoutrements of self-delusion. Not that you will heed that. Draconus tossed the key across to Hood. The jacket caught it. Gothos chained me out of love, he said, eyeing the key he held, and here you seek to free me in its name. But I am dead to such things now. One day, Draconus, I will call upon you in death's name, and I wonder, how will you answer? When that moment arrives, Hood, we shall both learn what that answer will be. Hood nodded. He reached down and unlocked the first manacle. Draconus turned to Erethan. We are done here. But Erethan said to Hood, Sir! The Jaggart paused, looked across. What would you tell me, son of Draconus? Only of my faith, he replied. Hood laughed. Faith? Go on, then. I will hear it. I believe, sir, that you will prove Gothos wrong. The Jaggart grunted. And is that a good thing? His argument, sir, it is wrong. You all failed to answer him, and so ended your civilization. But that argument never ends. It cannot end. And that is what you will prove. An argument as endless as his confession? Ha! You are bold, son of Draconus. Do you also have faith that I will win my war? No, sir. I think you will fail. But I will bless you for trying. There was silence, and then Erethan saw tears track crooked paths down the Jaggart's lined cheeks. Draconus set a hand upon his son's shoulder and drew him back. The hand was heavy, but the grip promised no pain. Reaching the steps, they paused, and his father said, Erethan, I regret not knowing you better. Okay, so on one end we have a brother writing an endless suicide note as an effort to flee death, and on the other we have a grieving brother challenging mortality and calling others to fight alongside him, to fight death head on. And we, the readers, know a bit about what's to come here, or at least we know where these two, especially Hood, wind up. Hood becomes Lord of Death, and in doing so, I'm not sure we can say one way or the other whether or not he succeeded in this war he's planning at this time. He certainly achieved a godly status and a position of power, but at least by the time we catch up to him in Book of the Fallen, by that point he's already frustrated by that position and all everything he has to deal with, and he just wants to be free of that status and that power. So anyway, I don't want to say too much more. I've already talked for a while, but I will say that this scene in particular is a bit difficult to analyze without knowing the more immediate conclusion of the Kharkanas trilogy. At the time I'm making this video, only 2 books are out. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. And that does it for my scene analysis videos on Book 1 of Kharkanas, or Forge of Darkness. Up next, I'll be looking at 3 more scenes, but this time from Fall of Light, Book 2 of this prequel trilogy. This is the book I've read most recently, and so far I'd say still my favorite read of 2022. So that first video should be up in a day or two, and it'll be another comedy analysis video if you saw and liked my Tahol and Bug video. This upcoming one is of course about the great comedic duo of Prezek and Dathanar, and that one will actually be relatively spoiler free. Anyway, for now, if you enjoyed this video and haven't already, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Bye.